Hello and welcome to this online lesson. My name is Mr. Hoven, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at the problems, especially the trouble in Boston leading up to the Revolutionary War. Again, Boston's kind of a focal point city. A lot of things happen that really set the tone for the patriotic feelings throughout the colonies and the anti-British feelings as well. So some of these events were very polarizing, led directly to increased tensions, which then transpired into the Revolutionary War. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, again, we're taking a closer look, and we're going to take a quick look back. Looking at the Townshend Acts. The Townshend Acts in 1767, Parliament reasserted its power by placing duties, or they placed taxes on imported goods, including glass, tea, paper, paint. The Townshend Acts placed taxes on all popular imported goods. The reason they got their name is because a chief financial officer from Great Britain named Charles Townshend placed this act on the colonists in order to get money for Great Britain to pay off their debt from the French and Indian War. Again, they kind of disguised this as saying, oh, this money will go to help the colonies. It didn't, and the colonists found out. This task infuriated the colonists as they now were being taxed even more without representation in English Parliament. Again, they're being taxed, there's taxation going on without representation, and they've had enough of it. This angered the colonists, and they began to express their displeasure through small acts of violence, along with boycotting different items that were taxed under the Townshend Acts. Again, these acts of violence, this boycotting occurred is particularly in Boston, Massachusetts. And in response, Great Britain sends thousands of troops to Boston to put down this violent resistance and maintain order in this focal point city of its colonies. So these small skirmishes and protests eventually kind of spring into much bigger ordeals which lead to problems. On March 5th, 1770, an unruly crowd threatened a squad of British soldiers that were protecting the customs office in Boston. So these individuals were a group of rope makers and apprentices. They begin what they claim was ice at the British soldier guard in the customs house in Boston. 8 more soldiers arrived to join this lone guard to protect him and the customs office, and they too were pelted with ice and possibly other objects. More on that in a little bit. In the chaos that ensued, the word fire was heard throughout the crowd. No one knows for sure who may have said it, but that triggered the soldiers to begin opening fire on the crowd. An African-American Crispus Attucks, along with 4 white colonists, were killed. This further increased tensions in the colonies between the British and the colonists, and things are about to erupt. Now, it's important to look at perspective here. On the left-hand side, and this is where my mouse is right here, you have a picture of the engraving that Paul Revere, remember Paul Revere was this very patriotic individual, drew of what he called the Bloody Massacre, or the Boston Massacre. In it, you see the helpless crowd who look like they're just trying to retreat. None of them look angry or that they've been doing anything to provoke these British colonists, being fired upon by the British soldiers who all are in a firing line, being ordered to fire, shooting them down and killing them mercilessly. Again, this was published in the colonies. On the other hand, a British newspaper printed this picture of the altercation. You've got the soldiers who are firing, but it looks like the colonists, or these apprentices and rope makers, are throwing clubs. It looks like a rock to me. I don't see any snow being thrown. So, much difference in perspective. And look here. Here's Crispus Attucks being killed. But in the colonial picture, he's nowhere to be found. Interesting that Paul Revere would omit an African American in his picture, or in his engraving, yet the British put him front and center. It's important to keep in mind perspective because 2 sides see this event in 2 very different ways. A British citizen would have a definitely different opinion about the Boston Massacre than a colonial citizen probably would. Just keep that in mind. Difference in perspective, like we've been talking about throughout our game. So, 9 British soldiers were put on trial for the murder of these 5 colonists. John Adams, who was a staunch patriot and very critical of the British, agreed to defend these soldiers. He argued with his cousin Samuel Adams that the soldiers deserved a fair trial. and all the soldiers were found not guilty of murder. After the Boston Massacre, the British canceled the Townshend Acts, but kept the tax on tea as a reminder of its authority over the colonists. And the last event that we're going to kind of put a little bit more of a microscope on is the Boston Tea Party. So the Tea Act in action. In May 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, which undercut all the prices of the smuggled tea in the colonies. This caused massive protests across the colonies. Many port cities refused to allow British ships with British tea to dock in their ports. And on December 16, 1773, a group of members of the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Indians, boarded ships carrying British tea in the Boston harbor. These colonists broke the barrels of tea and the boxes of tea and threw all of it into the Boston harbor. The British were enraged about the Boston Tea Party, and they passed the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, which closed the port of Boston to trade and to punish all colonists for their protests. These were known as intolerable acts because the colonial citizens saw these as intolerable and completely unfair. And this is leading to that building tension, which will eventually lead to the Revolutionary War. Hope you enjoyed this online lesson. I hope you have a better understanding of the Tea Act, the Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party, as well as the Boston Massacre. And we'll see you next time.